We have another action-packed video for you today with all the latest trade and free agent rumors, talking about players like Johnny Gaudreau and Jack Eichel. We've got the latest on the Wild, the Islanders, the Rangers, the Flyers. We have a whole lot more information regarding the expansion draft, some free agent talk, and Pekka Rinne has announced his retirement. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today's video is jam-packed with tons of information, a lot of trade and free agent rumors as we get closer to the NHL expansion draft and free agency, as well as the entry draft coming up here soon. So again, you're going to want to listen closely, pay close attention because there's a ton of information here and you don't want to miss, so watch all the way through and get all of today's latest info. Of course, we're going to get started with the news that came this morning from the Predators organization that Pekka Rinne has announced his retirement after 15 seasons. He certainly had a terrific career and is regarded as not only one of the greatest goalies of his generation, but certainly one of the best people. A terrific player, very well respected, very well liked. I have no doubt they're likely going to retire his number in Nashville. So that news conference came this morning. Yesterday we talked about the fact that the Predators had a huge announcement to make this morning and talked about wondering what it could be. That was one of the two items that we talked about as being a possibility. So there we have it. So Rinne, not a huge shocker here, has decided to call it a career. So it'll be interesting to see what direction the Preds go in for goaltending. Obviously, UC Saros has the starting job, but who else will work with him in that capacity? It's going to be weird seeing the Predators without Rinne being in the mix. He's been there for such a long time, but it's had a great career, and we certainly like to extend our best to him as he heads off into retirement. Now, we also got word today on the Lightning and a lot of the injuries that they were dealing with throughout the playoffs. To give you an idea what players are looking at here for offseason surgeries and recovery times, it was revealed that Victor Hedman was playing with a torn meniscus. I believe he already had surgery today, so that generally isn't too long of a recovery, so he should be okay for training camp. Kucherov, who we suspected was hurt on that cross-check from Scott Mayfield, was indeed accurate. He had a rib injury that he was dealing with in that regard. It's called a non-displaced rib fracture, so I would imagine that's probably mostly rest. I don't think there'd be anything else required in that capacity there. We also learned that Barclay Goodrow and Ryan McDonough were both playing with a broken hand. So we knew there was a lot of Warriors on this team. Now we just know a little bit further. They certainly were quite banged up, but they get the job done. No word on Stamkos, though. He was definitely dealing with something for sure, but there was no revelation about what that was when the GM talked about a lot of the injuries they were dealing with here earlier today in a news press conference for the Lightning. Now, we also got word that Dominic Ducharme is officially the full-time head coach of Montreal. He's no longer interim. That tag's been lifted. He was given a 3-year contract extension, which is believed to be around $1.7 million, which is pretty good for a first-time head coach in the NHL. So no big surprise there. Many felt that if he had a good run in the playoffs that he would secure that job, and that's exactly what happened. Ducharme did indicate that as far as he knows, it's looking good that his assistants, Luke Richardson and Alex Burrows, will both be back. He did mention, though, that it is possible a goaltending coach Sean Burke may work from a distance and may hire another goalie coach to work under him to be a more of the day-to-day kind of guy involved with a lot of the training and on-ice stuff. So I guess we'll have to see about that. But for the most part, it's looking like the Habs coaching staff could very well be intact from this past season. But of course, I think Burrows and Richardson both need to work out separate deals here. So I guess we'll have to see on that front if that's the case. And there's still some speculation where they need an AHL head coach. Burrows might turn out to be that guy, but they might go in a different direction too. So we'll have to wait and see on that front as well. We also got word that Eric Johnson of the Colorado Avalanche has indeed waived his no-move clause for expansion draft purposes. That was widely anticipated and expected here. So that's now official. So that's something that'll help the Avalanche a great deal going into the expansion draft. Obviously, they still have a lot of other good Ds, so they're still at risk to maybe lose somebody here, depending on how they go about their protection issues, unless they go with 8 skaters, which is a possibility. But of course, there's McCarr, there's Gerard, there's Taves, as well as Ryan Graves. And I would think that Graves might be the guy that doesn't get protected if they go 7-3-1, but wouldn't be shocking if they go 8 skaters either. So we'll have to see on that front. But staying with the Avalanche here for a moment, there is word from TSN's insider trading, Darren Dreger, saying that the Avalanche and Captain Gabriel Landeskog, at this point at least, are still a really long ways apart on a contract extension, that they're nowhere close. Now, of course, there's still time. Free agency technically doesn't begin until the 28th. But one thing about unrestricted free agents this year is obviously they can talk to Seattle if they're not protected. I mean, Colorado could still technically protect him so that couldn't happen. So it's not a given that he would be able to do that. If they don't really close that gap, that he's going to make it to market, and they could be at risk to lose their captain here. There's no guarantees that, they get a deal done, and where the things stand today. I think the Avalanche, though, will try to do everything in their power to keep him, of course, within reason. It's believed if he does hit free agency, I would look for a team like St. Louis or LA to be, high in contention. Now, the Kings may already end up making a move. We know they're looking for another top six forward. He would obviously fit that bill and be a terrific fit there. So if he makes it to free agency, I'm sure they'd be in it if they haven't already done something, but they may not wait to see if that happens or it's a possibility or not. Difficult to say, but if St. Louis moves Tarasenko, depending on what they get back, if they can squeeze it into the cap, I can see them going hard after Landeskog too. He would be a great fit in their system. So we'll see. I mean, given that he leaves the Avalanche organization right now, but getting word that contract negotiations are certainly far ways apart is a little bit unsettling, especially if you're an Avalanche fan at this point. Now, before we jump into the trade rumors for the day, I do want to pause for a moment here and acknowledge our channel sponsor, Manscaped. Top Shelf Hockey is proud to be sponsored by Manscaped. Of course, with Manscaped, we have a special offer here for all Top Shelf Hockey viewers where you can get 20% off and free shipping on all orders at manscaped.com. Now, of course, Manscaped just launched a brand new Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, which is a fantastic product. They've taken the level up here, even again with the skin-safe replaceable blades. It's waterproof, it's wireless charging, has a travel lock on it, as well as a nice light so you don't miss what you're doing. So certainly a terrific product. Now, many people associate Manscaped with their trimmers, which is certainly kind of their top product, but they do have a lot of other great options as well, including what they call the Weed Whacker, which is another trimmer for your ears and nose. And they have a variety of deodorants and sprays as well, which also keep you fresh and are terrific as well. So certainly Manscaped has a lot to offer, and we certainly highly recommend all of their products. So check out manscaped.com and use promo code TSH for 20% off and free shipping. So thanks very much for watching that promotional video. I do greatly appreciate that. Jumping now into today's trade rumors. There's a lot of them here. We got a lot to talk about. So we obviously saw today the big buyout news. You probably saw the video earlier in the channel. If you didn't, you can watch it up here in the YouTube cards. The Minnesota Wild announced that they're doing a very expensive long-term buyout for long-term players Zach Parise and Ryan Suter, who of course, a long time ago, 9 years ago now, signed 13-year contracts, matching contracts in free agency, which were mega deals at the time. There's not a lot of those 13-year deals left. So of course, those long-term deals that were outlawed in the second to last CBA here, obviously are the type of contracts that can come with a cap recapture penalty if players retire early, like you saw with Roberto Luongo and his impact on the Vancouver Canucks after retiring last offseason. So obviously, teams are kind of leery of those. But obviously, in this case, the Wild want to move on from these guys. They want to create some space here, but they're not going to get a ton of relief in years 2, 3, and 4. But this certainly opened up a lot more questions and got the rumor mill flowing here again as soon as this was announced. I mean, for one, does that mean you can take Matt Dumba off the trade rumor market? Probably, because he's likely going to be protected here in expansion. I didn't expect this to go down because it's so expensive for them to do. So I thought they were going to have to move Dumba as an effort to do that, to make sure they don't lose him for nothing in expansion. But now they don't have to do that. With Ryan Suter not in the mix, they can protect Brodin, Spurgeon, and Dumba. So clearly there's a good chance Matt Dumba can stay in Minnesota, at least for the time being. I'm not completely convinced he'll stay too long term, but at least another season. But once they hit that other part of the dead space there in years 2, 3, and 4, they're going to have some issues. And I hope that, I'm sure that they have some plans worked out, but it will impact who they can have on this roster. But the fact that they're going to be saving just over $10 million in cap space for next year, it automatically raised a lot of red flags. People saying, well, they're one of the rumored teams in on Jack Eichel. Does this mean that they're opening up the space because they're really confident that they can get that done? And I'm going to say maybe, but not necessarily. I think the Wild are a team that are definitely interested in Eichel. I have no doubt. But according to Elliot Friedman, they're also very interested in Christian Dvorak, who would come at a much smaller price tag. So they're looking at center iceman. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, it starts with Eichel and it moves down from there. But if it's not Eichel, then they could certainly go in another direction to maybe do some other things here. But the Wild don't want to give up the farm. They don't want to forego the future here. They don't want to give up too much. They have some good-looking prospects and guys like Rossi and Boldy. They have a young goaltender in Kakinen that would be attractive. They're in a tough situation here where they're kind of transitioning, and they're going to need a lot of good ELC contracts on the books to kind of offset that dead cap space for a while. So, Guerin's made it known that he's interested in making big moves, but he's not going to give away the farm to make it happen. So I do think that there's a better chance now that Dumba stays, at least for another year. Not a given, but much better odds. And I do think that they'll continue to push here in a Jack Eichel situation. But to me, if they're going to do that, it's almost going to have to guarantee that Kevin Fiala goes the other way, along with probably a player like a Jordan Greenway, a first-round pick, and maybe one of their prize prospects like either Rossi or Boldy, but not both. To me, that's likely what it would take to get a deal done. So we will see. Friedman did mention as well in the latest podcast today that the price on Eichel is coming down some, but it's still quite high, and feels that it's likely going to have to come down a little bit more before we see a deal. And an Eichel trade is almost a given to not happen before expansion anyway. So we're at least going to be probably another week or two minimum before a deal gets totally come together here, if that trade's going to happen. So we'll see, but I would think that the Eichel to Minnesota Wild talk is probably going to pick up here. I do believe they're still firmly interested, but just because they did that buyout, it doesn't automatically mean that they're in a position that a deal's coming here imminently at all. So I wouldn't get ahead of ourselves on that front. Now, when it comes to Parise and Suter as well, a couple other quick tidbits here. For one, a little bit of a fun fact for you. If you didn't know this, then you'll learn something new today. Way back when they signed as free agents with the Minnesota Wild, did you know that they were really, really close to one or both of them landing with the Detroit Red Wings? Now, of course, this was a time when Nicholas Lidstrom was retiring. They were about 3 or 4 years removed from winning a Stanley Cup, and Ken Holland and Mike Babcock and company in Detroit were trying to figure out a way to continue to kind of retool a little bit to remain relevant and contend for more Stanley Cups, while they had a lot of good players still in that core like Datsuk and Zetterberg, etc., under contract that were still playing in the prime years of their career. So they were really close to landing both of these players. They were closer on Suter by the looks of it, from what I've seen here from the Detroit Free Press. Looking back, I do remember hearing these rumblings all those years ago, but obviously when I saw the article, was refreshing myself on what was rumored to be taking place. But Parise was a little bit less likely to sign, but they were really close to getting Suter, and it was Parise who kind of persuaded Suter to go with him to Minnesota. So obviously Minnesota was a little bit of a better fit for Suter for family purposes, and obviously great, for professional purposes as well, going to a team with a guy like Parise who he was friends with, and obviously, together they thought they could really help that team contend for Stanley Cups, along with what else was already there in the Wild organization. Unfortunately, they didn't get the job done. Wouldn't it have been very interesting if things would have worked out differently and they would have ended up in Detroit? I mean, Detroit was a team on a long run of consecutive years in the playoffs, won a few Stanley Cups under guys like Lidstrom and Holland and company being at the helm, and they almost got 2 top free agents to really continue pushing that forward. Things likely would have been different there in that last stretch of 5 to 10 years in Detroit. It would have been very interesting to see how that would have indeed played out. But where do they end up now? There's obviously lots of talk about, now that they're going to be free agents, who's going to sign Parise and Suter? Well, to me, Parise is not going to have as much interest as Suter. I can see Parise likely going to the Islanders and Lou Lamoriello. It has been rumored that the last year or two they've explored trades before to get him to go to the Islanders. So now that they can sign him on a 1-year deal for cheap money, if he will do that, and really I would think he would, then they can make that happen. They can make that work. But to do a trade would have been way more complicated. As far as Suter goes, some thought maybe the Islanders would be a good fit for him too. They're trying to move Nick Leddy. We know that. If they freed up that kind of money, maybe they could afford Suter. And of course, where did Ryan Suter play when he began his career? He played in Nashville. Who was his head coach? Barry Trotz. So there's obviously a lot of familiarity there. And maybe that would be something that they would want to kind of reunite and reignite. But according to a lot of other people around the league and league sources, it doesn't sound like Suter to the Islanders has any traction. To me, I think it's rumored to be teams like the Capitals, for example, maybe the Flyers. I've heard LA to an extent. I've also think that it's fair to say Boston makes sense. The Bruins definitely need a left side defenseman. But even Chicago is another possibility. Now that Duncan Keith is gone, I wouldn't completely rule that out. It's all going to depend on price tag and money. But, obviously there's lots of teams that would be, geographically speaking, not too far for Suter. So we'll see what happens. They're both going to have their own fair degree of interest heading into free agency here, and we'll see where they end up. But they're definitely going to be NHL players. It was reported as well that Ryan Suter was completely blindsided by this, did not see it coming, and was really shocked. So we'll see where he ends up next. I think both players will be somewhat motivated to prove the Wild wrong that they made a bad decision, but we'll find out how things can carry on for their career here moving forward. There was also information today from Dave Pagnotta of the fourthperiod.com indicating that the LA Kings, as we know, are still pushing hard for another top six forward, and one of the players that they said they would have interest in would be Tyler Bertuzzi in Detroit. Now, of course, Bertuzzi is going to be a player that's going to draw interest from around the league, so don't be surprised if there's a lot of different rumors that come out here over the next number of days or weeks before a deal gets done, assuming he does get traded, on where he could end up going, because he's a kind of player that's going to draw a ton of interest. There's no doubt. He's not going to be super expensive. He can play with a lot of grit, determination, provide some offense. Like, he's a good player you want to have on your team. You hate playing against him, but you love him when he's on your side. He's one of those kind of players. So LA, like I said, is going to be in on a variety of things here. They probably don't know which direction they're going. They're doing a lot of exploration talks right now. They're checking in on Bertuzzi. They're looking in at Tarasenko. They're talking about Jack Eichel. They're not going to do all of these things. They're probably going to do one. They might add a blue line or two, but when it comes to the big name forwards that have been linked to the Kings, they're probably only going to get one of those deals done. That's if they do. They can always turn to free agency and save their assets and go for a guy like a Brandon Saad too, or Mike Hoffman, or one of those guys who can be like a proven middle six scoring winger. That's also a possibility. I think that Rob Blake, Luke Robitaille and the Kings, they're probably really analyzing this very closely, and they have a broad range of players right now that seem to be kind of interested in, and they're kind of determining what direction they go in. So I'm not sure we'll see a deal here super quick, but there's going to be lots of Kings rumors here before something gets done, I have no doubt. Now, we also pretty well get confirmation from Flyers GM Chuck Fletcher that Jake Voracek is indeed available. Now, he made an appearance on the Snow to the Goalie podcast, which covers the Philadelphia Flyers. We haven't heard the whole podcast yet, but they did release a little snippet of their interview with the Flyers GM today, and he does confirm that he had conversations with Voracek because of money in the cap situation and the financials and everything, that they need to make him available here in expansion, and that they might have to move him. But there's also possible that he may have to come back. So, as we've heard from other people like Elliot Friedman, saying that he was told this was not a situation where there's a lot of tension, or it's not acrimonious, is what he said. So it's not a situation where there's, the relationship has gone sour. They just both understand that because of economics and the desire to improve the team, that there's a possibility that Jake Voracek could move on. Like, he's going to be made available to Seattle. He could be traded, so he's definitely available. Conversations are being had, but it's not 100% given that he goes. That contract he carries does pose some issues to getting a deal done, and Chuck Fletcher obviously acknowledges the fact that he may not be able to get this done and might have to come back with them, and they're okay with that too if they absolutely have to. But I think they kind of all agree here that it's time for a change and it's time for a fresh start. So at least now we know that that's more than just a rumor coming directly from the mouth of the general manager in Philadelphia. I also saw words from Frank Saravalli today talking about the New York Rangers, and he believes that a player that's very much available for trade is winger Pavel Buchnevich. Now, Buchnevich had a career year last year, and is certainly a player that you kind of have to determine at this point long-term if he fits with you or not. Not to say that he can't play well. I mean, there'd be a point of them selling high if they do trade him, but he needs a new contract, so that's part of the issue here. But it's also believed that they're in on guys like Jack Eichel, and if they're going to make a play for Eichel, he might have to be a piece that's included. So there is that, and they're also looking at other players too. So it's quite possible that a Buchnevich trade does happen. They have so many other young players that are going to eventually want to take on the role that he has right now, that if you sign him to a longer term deal like you did with Chris Kreider, for example, you're going to end up boxing somebody out, and longer term, it's probably not best for business. So as much as they like Buchnevich, and he's had a great time developing, it's just they have so many guys there between Lafreniere and Kakko and Kravtsov and all these other young players in the forward group. Like, they can't keep everybody, and it could be a situation where they do find a way to move on here to save some money or include him in an Eichel trade or whatever. But it's very much, I believe, that he is available for the right deal. There's also a segment today in the 31 Thoughts podcast where they talked about the Chicago Blackhawks. Of course, we've seen them complete the Duncan Keith trade where they now have Caleb Jones. And Merrick and Friedman were discussing what their thoughts were on Seth Jones going to Chicago. They both felt like a Seth Jones trade would have to start with Kirby Dach and maybe even include a player like maybe like Adam Boqvist, and if not Dach, maybe DeBrincat. And that doesn't make a lot of sense for them. They need to be able to transition on to the next phase. So they have to be able to move on from guys like Taves and Kane and, the next generation, so to speak. And to give up a big chunk of that for Seth Jones just seems unlikely. So to me, I kind of agree with them on that. I think that a Jones to Chicago move would be more likely to happen a year from now in free agency if he does get traded without signing an extension. But another real interesting tidbit on Chicago that Friedman brought up was that he had heard some rumors about Chicago contacting Vegas about one of their goalies maybe being interested in Marc Andre Fleury, and he said from what he can say that those rumors appear to be true, that there is interest there for the Blackhawks. Now, of course, we know they don't really have a great long-term outlook on goaltending. Kevin Lankin came in last year and certainly exceeded expectations, but you could say that it's not clear if he's the real goalie of the future or not. So there's certainly a lot of question marks in the Hawks between the pipes. So the fact that they would go after a goaltender this offseason is not surprising. A little bit surprising that they might go after Fleury, but it's not really clear what Vegas is going to do. Apparently, Friedman's saying that the Golden Knights are getting a lot of inquiries when it comes to goaltending and saying, like, let us know which one you want to move and we'll consider talking about this further, that even if it's Leonard instead of Fleury, that either one, like, they're both would have interest and teams are inquiring on either or. I mean, Marc Andre Fleury's got 1 year left at $7 million. It's believed that the owner there, Bill Foley's made it clear he wants him to retire as a Golden Knight and doesn't want him to go anywhere, but the management group and coaching staff seems to favor Leonard. I mean, even though Fleury won the Vezina Trophy this year, he didn't end the playoffs as a starting goaltender. In the most important game of the year, they went to Robin Leonard. So that tells me that they kind of lean towards him as being the guy of the future, along with that contract extension they gave. It only makes sense, right? I mean, you'd have to think that's how they feel, but could Fleury end up in Chicago? I mean, hard to say. I would not, again, I've said this before, I think the Penguins will get involved too because they clearly want to make some changes in goal. Why not bring back the Vezina Trophy winner to where he started and let him finish things out in Pittsburgh? To me, that makes sense, but they may have a tougher time maybe making it work when it comes to cap and all the other logistics you have to get through. But Marc Andre Fleury to Chicago, I thought was a very interesting tidbit, and we'll see if there's any more to this and if the story continues to develop and trend in that direction like it could happen. Now, according to Arthur Staple, who's covering the New York Islanders for The Athletic, he was talking in a Q&A, looking at the Tarasenko rumors and looking at some other players that the Islanders could be interested in. And one thing that appears to be very much clear, based on all the different places that we're getting information here on the Islanders, is that they're definitely interested in bringing in a winger for Matthew Barzal. There's no doubt about that. Between Tarasenko being of interest, and it looks as though that Johnny Gaudreau could be on their radar as well. Now, at this point, we know Tarasenko wants to be traded. We have that confirmed. The Blues and him are looking for a separation, and that's a confirmed topic. But when it comes to Johnny Gaudreau, word is they're talking about an extension. So there's no guarantee that they're going to be trading Johnny Gaudreau out of the Calgary organization. But we don't know how contract talks are going to go. And a lot of times we hear reports that contract extensions are being worked out, and people will say, oh, they're not going to trade him, they're trying to sign him. Right, but what if those talks don't go well? They have to make a decision, and that's why they're having those talks, is to decide if he fits long-term based on what he's looking for. If they can get the right deal, the right price, they can build around him, then they likely do sign him and he stays. But that may not happen. There's no guarantee. So we're not saying that Johnny Gaudreau is being traded at all. All we were saying is that Arthur Staple has indicated that if he were available, that he feels the Islanders would be very, very interested, and that might be a preferred target over a guy like Tarasenko. Now, Tarasenko is a little bit older than Gaudreau, comes with all those injuries. Gaudreau is an extremely good playmaker, really good skater. To me, he would be a great fit with a guy like Barzal. You throw a guy like Anders Lee on that line who can provide the size and strength and ability to score, and those three guys would make a tremendous line. It could be a go-to scoring threat for the Islanders, no doubt. I think they could all make each other better. But again, no guarantee that Johnny Gaudreau is available. But according to Arthur Staple, if he is, look for them to be very much involved in trade talks, and we'll see. I'm not sure that the talks on Tarasenko are going overly well. I know there's been links, but at this point, we can't really say that they're for sure a front runner or that those things are progressing well. I think that, to me, a Gaudreau trade, if it were to happen, would be a lot more sensible here for the Islanders. So we'll see what happens, but those are things that they're looking at right now with Lou and company on Long Island. So that is all your news for today. Let me know your thoughts and everything down below in the comments. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.